When I stood up to record this video, I have a standing desk. My first thought was, Matthew, and yeah, I refer to myself in the third person a lot because I work by myself and it makes me feel less lonely, but my first thought was, Matthew, can you really make a worthwhile 10-minute video on this topic? Why not come to all of our fellow and future hobbyists out there? My name is Matthew and I am your BRS beginner guru. I often wonder how much food I waste or how much of that food just ends up turning into nitrates and phosphates and polluting my tank. And not until researching this video did I realize why all of my chromis keep dying. You'd think that after almost a decade in this hobby, that would have been something I would have figured out a long time ago, but I didn't. I'll be curious to know whether or not after watching this video you learned something. There are a ton of different feeding tools out there. You've got feeding rings, defrosters, I can't think of the name, basters, feeders, syringes, pipettes, auto feeders, seaweed clips, and seaweed grazers. That's quite a few. Feeding rings can either be a simple suction cup or something like this one from Two Little Fishies, which is a magnet. They help keep your pellets in place, they help hydrate your flakes, and they help you keep all of that food from just floating directly into the overflow. And then you have defrosters like this one from Innovative Marine. I currently use this exact one on these two tanks back here. Great for frozen food, it helps dispense it slowly. Then you have your basters and your syringes and your long feeding things. If you need to target feed something way down in your tank, some of these can be expanded and are really helpful. Or for larger pieces of frozen food, using just a regular turkey baster is great for target feeding. Then you have a whole bunch of automatic feeders. These are fantastic pieces of equipment to use, especially when you're gone on vacation, but not for everyday use, but we'll talk about that in a minute. And then you have your seaweed clips and grazers. This grazer here from Innovative Marine and this clip here from Two Little Fishies work fantastic for holding pieces of nori inside your tank and especially great for fish like tangs. Let's spend a little bit of time talking about best practices when feeding your fish. The first question you want to ask yourself is, where do your fish live? Will they come out from wherever they are to eat during feeding, or do you need to bring the food directly to them? You'll need to make sure that your fish get the type of food they need and it gets delivered to them where they can eat it. For example, if you have a whole bunch of chromis that will attack the food at the surface, but also a goby that stays on the bottom, you'll need to make sure you feed food that doesn't just stay at the surface, but also sinks down for the goby. Or let's say you have something like a signal goby or a whole bunch of anthias. It would be rather pointless to just feed them large pellets or frozen foods, even though they might eat those. Because of the type of fish they are, their diet requires very, very fine foods. So you're absolutely going to have to target feed them with very small foods such as copepods, rotifers, or calanus. Sinking versus floating foods, pretty simple here. If you have floating foods, you will have to do one of four things. Turn off the return pump during feeding, use some sort of feeding ring, submerge the food below the water line, or pre-soak the food. Boop, 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 boop. And if you have pellets that sink really quickly, you're going to need to feed them slowly. Don't dump them in all at once, because there are a lot of fish out there that will only eat pellets from the water column. And once they hit the substrate, they're no longer going to eat it. I know, fish can be a little picky. I used to just go by and just dump in a whole bunch of food, and then I didn't realize why my nitrates and phosphates were spiking so quickly. I was putting in the right amount of food too quickly. If you take that same amount of food and spread it out over a couple minutes, not only will the fish be able to eat it, but you'll have way less waste, which means way less nitrates and phosphates left over. And of course, make sure that all of your fish get food. There's going to be aggressive fish in your tanks that are going to go after the food a lot quicker than some of your more docile. So one thing you can do, if you notice not everyone's getting food, feed separate areas of the tank at the same time, and hopefully that will give enough opportunity for the more docile fish. Moving on to frozen foods. Really, you can put frozen food either directly in some sort of defroster like the one from Innovative Marine, or you can pre-mix it with RODI water. Both of my tanks back here pretty much just take 1 cube of mysis shrimp twice a day, and the beautiful thing about the defroster is it releases the food relatively slowly, so you don't have to wait around and just feed a little bit at a time. You can just drop them in and the defroster does its work. But the benefit of mixing up frozen food in some sort of container beforehand is you can add different kinds of foods together, and you can also put in additives like Celcon to increase the fat content. Pellets, most pellets will eventually sink, but not until they're hydrated. That's why using a feeding ring is awesome, because your fish will learn where the food comes from. They'll start coming right to the front of the tank, which is fun to watch, and it allows those pellets time to hydrate and slowly fall down the water column. If you don't use a feeding ring, you may want to consider turning off your return pump during feeding, just so that it doesn't stick to the surface and go immediately into your overflow. Flakes, well, most flakes will just stay on the surface of the water and go immediately into the overflow, so you're going to have to either use a feeding ring to keep them in place, or you're going to have to take a small pinch and place it below the water line before letting go. Flakes typically are quite large, and not all fish can consume something that big, so make sure you have different size flakes for your different kinds of fish. One easy thing to do is just take a pinch of those flakes, hold it below the water line, and grind it between your fingers. That way you have some larger pieces and some smaller pieces. And then we got seaweed. Whatever your preference is, just go with it. Typically, I have found that my herbivores really like seaweed that is attached to something. So you can just use something as simple as a rubber band around a piece of rock. You can use a magnetic veggie clip, or you can use the innovative marine grazer. Whatever your preference is, it's going to be fine. Let's move on to some of the common questions that beginners have when learning how to feed their fish. Should I rinse my frozen food? Probably not necessary. If you do decide to rinse your frozen food, be sure you're rinsing it with RODI water and not tap water. But honestly, the amount of nutrients you're adding into the tank is probably quite small, and it's just not worth the effort. What is target feeding? There are two kinds of feeding. There's broadcast feeding and there's target feeding. Broadcast feeding is when you just put food into the tank and let it go where it will. Then the fish have to come out and actually find the food to consume it. But that doesn't work for all kinds of fish. So you have target feeding. Target feeding is when you choose a target and you feed directly. So if you have a shy fish or a fish that likes to stay on the substrate, so you'll want to make sure you use something like a turkey baster to feed them. Just make sure you get the food as close to them as possible so they eat. How do I feed herbivores? Really, you have two choices. You can use some sort of nori, or you can use some sort of algae pellet food. Nori is really easy. You can use some sort of veggie clip or some sort of algae grazer, put it into the tank. The tangs and other herbivores will find it and go crazy. Or you can use something like the Hikari Seaweed Extreme, which is a pellet form of algae. It might take a little while to get your herbivorous fish used to eating that, but once they do, it makes it really simple. My tangs are eating regular meaty pellets and other carnivorous frozen foods, so do I also need to feed them nori or other sorts of algae? Yes, absolutely. So just because your tangs are eating meaty food, it doesn't mean it's best for them, so you're gonna have to feed them every day with something else, either that's nori or some sort of algae pellet food. How do I feed anthias, chromis, copperband butterfly fish, or any other fish that like to graze on the reef all day? Well, you have several options. The first is using some sort of live copepods. You can get in weekly shipments or monthly shipments of copepods, but you can also cultivate your own copepod population by building some sort of refugium. You can also use the frozen dead coral skeleton method, where you take a piece of dead coral skeleton, you put a whole bunch of food on top of it, you put it in the freezer, then you pull it out, you put it in the tank, and it will slowly melt so that all those fish can kind of come and eat it. That takes a little bit more work, but it can work really well. Or you can just feed the fish several times a day. I'm talking like 5 to 7 times a day with a really fatty food such as reef chili or calanus, and you can even add some Celcon into the mix to up the fat content even more. Well, then you may ask, Matthew, how do I feed the chromis, the anthias, the copperband butterfly fish that many times a day without sending my nutrient levels soaring? Simple answer to that, you gotta up your filtration. Whether that means some sort of refugium with macroalgae, an algae scrubber, a more high-powered protein skimmer, changing out your mechanical filtration more often, you'll just have to figure out what the right balance is for your tank, because you're absolutely right. If you feed your tank that much, you are going to get a lot more nutrient levels, so you're gonna need to remove them somehow. I'm at work all day, so should I set up an auto feeder? Probably not. Auto feeders are fantastic when you're gone on vacation, but auto feeders almost always will lead to higher nutrient levels, especially high nitrates and high phosphates. Because remember that pellet foods are 5 to 10 times more nutrient dense by weight when compared to frozen foods. So if your standard mode of feeding is a pellet feeder, you are likely going to overfeed the tank, which is probably going to lead to nuisance algae in the long run. Should I turn off all of my pumps during feeding? There is no easy answer here because it depends on a lot of factors. It depends on the kind of food you're feeding. Will it go into the overflow? Where are you feeding the tank? And what are the feeding habits of the fish? If you have fish that like to feed directly from the water column, then you'll probably want to leave those pumps on because it will simulate an actual feeding environment like they have in nature. But if you have fish that just like to graze or like to pick from the substrate, then you can probably turn them off and allow them to eat. Whether you choose to turn off your pumps or not, just make sure all of your fish get the food they need. How often should I feed my fish? I have wondered the answer to this question for almost a decade, and I just recently realized it's completely the wrong question to ask. The question isn't how many times a day should I feed my fish. The question is how many feedings a day does this fish need? Or how many feedings a day does that fish need? How many times you feed your fish a day is completely dependent on the species. You may have a large predator that only needs to eat once every couple weeks, but you may have something like Anthias that needs to be fed 5 to 8 times per day. So if you're thinking like I was, how many times a day should I feed my fish? Ask yourself, how many times a day does my Anthias need to be fed? How many times a day does my frogfish need to be fed? How many times a day do my clownfish need to be fed? And then you'll have to make adjustments accordingly. How will I know if I'm overfeeding my fish? If you're testing your PO4 and your NO3, so your phosphates and your nitrates like twice a week, you will know you're overfeeding if your phosphates and nitrates start creeping up. But if you're not testing frequently, you will know when you start getting nuisance algae growth. How do I know if I'm underfeeding my fish? Well, typically if you watch your fish closely, you'll notice they're not as plump as they used to be. They may turn more aggressive, and over time the fish is just gonna die. So while this is challenging to do, we're gonna give you our recommended feeding schedule. We like to mix it up a little bit. So one day we like to feed frozen foods, and then the next day we do some sort of mixture of pellets with both meaty and herbivorous food. You're gonna feed 1 to 5 times per day, and that totally depends on the type of fish you have. You need to do some research and find out how much that fish needs to eat and adjust the amount of feedings accordingly. If you have fish that are grazers or like to snack all day, then you will need to feed them way more frequently, but a smaller amount of food at each feeding. What is the biggest mistake you can make when feeding your fish? It is trying to adopt a one-size-fits-all approach. You're gonna have to adjust the types of food and how you feed and the frequency of feeding based on the type of fish that you have. Well, then what about food soaks? There are a lot of food soaks out there, and some of them can be really beneficial. Food soaks can be used on any sort of food. You can place a few drops onto frozen food, you can rehydrate freeze-dry food, or you can mix it in with your pellets and they'll absorb some of those soaks. A few of my favorite kinds of food soaks. The first one is Celcon. This is fatty acids. I especially like to use this when I'm feeding my really high energy fish like Anthias or Chromis. Then you have amino acids. This one's a coral amino acids. Amino acids increase the protein content for foods, encourages more vibrant coloration, and provide the building blocks for new tissue growth. Amino acids are the building blocks for proteins. And then of course you have vitamins. Just like with humans, we use vitamins for all sorts of things. The same is true with fish. And the last type of food soak are flavor and scent enhancers. If you have a really finicky fish, sometimes all you need is a little bit of garlic. Add that to the food, and while it may not add a lot of nutritional value, for some reason fish love garlic. Go figure, right? The only way you're gonna figure out the right amount of feed is to test your phosphate and your nitrate super frequently. So what test kits do we recommend? Well, I use these 2 test kits once a week, maybe twice a week, and they are the best. I think I've used almost every single type of phosphate and nitrate test kit out there, and these are so simple and give you such an accurate reading that I would spend the money on them. They are, of course, the Hanna checkers. Seriously, for I think, what, $50 a piece, pick up a couple extra packs of reagents, and these will give you such accurate readings, and you'll be able to tell when you start overfeeding before the nuisance algae breaks out. Can I just tell you about 2 things that I didn't know until researching this video? The first was why my Chromis kept dying. I just thought I was getting bad batches, and I may have been, but I didn't know that they needed to be fed more than twice a day. Seriously, how did I not know that? Well, probably because there's not a lot of good information about how often to feed them. I knew that Anthias needed to be fed a lot, but I didn't know that Chromis needed. So now I feed them several times a day, and I like to use the freeze-dried Calanus, and I hydrate it with some Celcon, and they seem to be doing a lot better. And the other thing I recently learned, well, until about a year and a half ago, I was primarily using auto feeders all day, every day, because I was like, you know what? It's so much easier. I don't have to feed my fish and they'll get fed. Well, guess what the problem was? I always had nuisance algae and I didn't know why. And then I finally realized it was because I was using pellets too much. So I quit using the auto feeder, I drastically reduced the amount of pellets I fed, and I switched my primary focus to frozen foods. And now I just get really small outbreaks of algae that I can usually catch by testing, and if not, I can just reduce my feeding even more. You've heard me say it a lot of times already, but a high percentage of beginners quit before they reach the 1 year mark. You wanna know why? Well, that's episode 38, so stay tuned. I hope this video didn't seem too disjointed. While I was filming it, I was like, Matthew, this is not your best work. So I hope you found something valuable in this video, and I will try my best to do a better job next time. As always, everybody, thank you for watching. Happy reefing, be well. We'll see you next time.